Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about a book. And no, this is not yet a Malazan video, because I've been super fucking busy with the Riddle of Steel Festival. We'll probably announce stuff for that tonight. Most of you probably have like no interest whatsoever in coming to that festival unless you already live in Germany or like at least in Europe and are into epic metal and doom metal. If so, well, you're more than welcome to show up and, fun day. But anyway, there's a lot of time pressure there, and then the record label stuff is also taking up a lot of time right now. So the last couple of days, I didn't, actually have the brain power to concentrate on reading a Malazan book. I started Orb Scepter Throne and had to give up after, I've read it before, but I tried to read it and I've had to give up after a couple of, half an hour, not even finishing the prologue this time around because I just couldn't retain any information because my brain was fucked, so to speak. So what did I do instead? I went and read another book, and this is the book that we're going to talk about here today. I finally read Kings of the Wyld by Nicholas Eames. Now, this is a book that has been floating around in BookTube for ages, well, 4 years, I guess. And a lot of people have told me I should read this, and as y'all know, I don't react well to suggestions in general because I'm an idiot and contrary bastard to boot. So I finally went and read it, and I really feel strongly about a lot of stuff, so we need to talk about that. And that's what we're going to do today. The, Kings of the Wyld by Nicholas Eames, and I have words and stuff for you. So let's do that, shall we? Cheers. Alright, so this is sort of a review kind of thing. I'm not gonna rate it because, rating is not what I do. But I still have a lot of critical thoughts about it. So I'll mostly go full spoiler. I might talk about like actual plot elements and stuff. So if you still haven't read the book, this is the very short version of what you can expect. It is a fun, action-packed fantasy book that tries to mix the ideas of rock stardom and tabletop role-playing conventions into something that could work really well. And if you are either a fan of rock music in general, mostly 60s and mostly 70s rock music, I would say, or have played a lot of Dungeons & Dragons, or leafed a lot through monster manuals, you can get fun out of it just by all the references that are made and all the jokes that are made about that. If you have no interest in either one of those two things, it is still a okay fantasy story / road trip kind of thing with an interesting, rather unique world, and yeah, that's it. It has a lot of fucking promise and a lot of really, really cool ideas, but the execution lacks. That's sort of my very small, short review. So if you want to just like deal with these ideas and concepts, go ahead. If a really unique idea executed poorly makes you angry and upsets you, this may actually be a book for you to read in the morning to get your blood pressure up, now that we can't read Donald Trump tweets in the morning anymore to do that. Anyway, so yeah, it's that kind of book. But I'm sure there's a lot of more qualified reviews out there to go about it. So what will I do today when I talk about Kings of the Wyld here? Now, first of all, obviously, I want to, explain why first of all, why a lot of people told me I should read this book, and then why, on the other hand, I kind of felt that, yeah, maybe I should read this book. But also, why I may be more critical than a lot of other people about this book. So, I mean, those of you who've been here before kind of know me at this point. Those of you who are new here, welcome. Come in, like, subscribe if you feel like it. I'm Raf. I talk about books. But I also run a record label for heavy metal, and I have booked concerts, I've been on tour with bands, and I have played tabletop role-playing games for about 20 years at this point. So, yeah. Being the nerd that I am, I've also, spent a lot of time reading role-playing books and being generally aware of what is going on in the tabletop role-playing game industry. So a book that combines stuff from those two worlds, which are arguably basically what I spend all my day with, certainly is something to intrigue me, right? But on the other hand, I have, personal investment in both of those worlds. Probably more in the rock music world at this point than the tabletop role-playing game world, but certainly in both of them. And when we come to something like Kings of the Wyld, which is sort of a humorous book, we come to the problem that humor is very difficult, especially if you have a personal investment. And that may be part of what made this a difficult read for me. Not a fully difficult read. I certainly had a bunch of chuckles there. There are some really good ideas in here. I just felt that a lot of stuff wasn't treated, in a way it may deserve. There's other issues with it as well that I'm going to get into in a second, but that's sort of where I'm coming from and why I think I may be more critical of a lot of stuff now than some other people that have less of a personal investment in those things. Because look, I'm not making money with the whole metal stuff. It's not exactly paying bills. It's hardly breaking even. Well, sort of, sometimes. But the point is, I guess it's kind of difficult to explain to people who are not as deeply involved in a scene, and heavy metal may be a special scene there when it comes to age groups, at least. But this is more than just music I listen to. It is very much part of my life, of my existence in a way. And I know when you're 15, that goes for almost every one of us. Well, most people kind of lose that when you reach your 30s or whatever. With metal, that doesn't seem to happen with a lot of people. It certainly hasn't happened with me. So yes, there is a lot of more personal investment in there for me, I guess. So just, as a heads up in the beginning. So, I guess let's talk about where we are going here. So, the premise of the book, that there is a parallel between groups of heroes and rock stars, so to speak, is not exactly new. Now, there's obviously been, it's been a joke for a long time that heroes gain fame, and in our day and age, especially in since the 1970s, the rock star, it's kind of changed nowadays, but the rock star of, say, the 70s and 80s is something of a personification of that hero status, I guess. So, to make that connection is not exactly a new thing. We see that with, Terry Pratchett has some books where, the treatment of heroes goes in that direction. Terry Pratchett even has a book. And that's the other thing. One of my favorite Discworld novels is Soul Music, which deals with rock music and hero in a fantasy world. So it's also difficult to live up to that, but that's just an aside. My point is, the connection that heroes are treated like rock stars nowadays, because that's sort of how we see fame in the 20th century, or the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century, is not exactly new. In a way, it even already swapped over to tabletop role-playing, because what you have there, and that's something that we mostly, I guess, need to thank tabletop role-playing for, well, not mostly, but also ever since, I guess, sort of Lord of the Rings as well, is the idea that you have an adventuring party. a group of people that fulfill all kinds of roles. There's archetypes. Dr. Chase and Dr. Canavan, or the Critical Dragon, I should say, made a bunch of videos on like fantasy archetypes and all of that stuff. And yes, the idea of like having a group is sort of something that gained popularity. Having a party there, in that parlance, has been around since the 70s with the rise of Dungeons and Dragons, mostly. And Tunnels and Trolls, which is way better, just saying. But the point is, to make the connection to like a rock band, or it's kind of obvious and kind of cool as a premise, because you can then parody, in a way, a lot of the crazy bullshit that is going on in, say, the rock music industry. And so forth. It kind of was done in a way with like the rise of the third edition Dungeons and Dragons and the open gaming license and all these third-party products. There was a series of adventures in a sort of setting called X-Crawl. I've never really played it, but I had a look at it, and the premise for that tabletop role-playing game was that dungeon crawling was a sort of reality TV show in the future, and your characters are actually characters, and you're a group of heroes that goes together in these dungeons for the entertainment of people outside. So the idea of it already kind of took that with the idea of reality TV, which was just like the new thing around 2003, 4, or whatever that was, when people were looking at Big Brother and all that bullshit. So that's sort of where you already have that connection into the tabletop role-playing games industry, and the idea of a group of adventurers, a band of adventurers, or a party of adventurers being a unit that has fame as a group in a modern, and connected to like the ways of modern image and modern day fame and the way we deal with it nowadays in public awareness. So that stuff has been done before has been floating around. But what Nicholas Eames does, and that's cool as a premise, is he kind of combines those two things. So groups of heroes, of mercenaries, are called bands, and then you can do all the band jokes that you want, which I'm not going to say that he kind of jumped on that bandwagon. But anyway, point is, the premise, while being lying around in like different bits and pieces for a while, Eames goes and combines that into one story. Now that's really cool. I like that premise because I do like me some like anachronistic pop culture references in a fantasy book. That's fine. I'm a huge Discworld fan after all. But, and this is like the part where I feel things break down for the first time, and we're going to go into detail there as well. This book is from 2017. We are in an age, have been for like the last 5-6 years, I would say, where where we question a lot of aspects of former ages. We are aware of misogyny, of sexism. We are aware of all kinds of discrimination against all kinds of minorities, sexual orientation being one of them, gender. Actually, it's obviously ridiculous to call those minorities, but you know what I mean. We are aware of these things in general. We should be, I guess. And we can't go and just reproduce jokes, cliches, and whatnot from eras where, well, sexism was rampant and homophobia was rampant and all these other things. We kind of need to be, as I said, like the general discourse has been aware of this, or should have been aware of this for a while. And I'm going to say this right now, the rock music scene, the heavy metal scene even more so, I would say, but the hard rock scene in general, and rock music scene, has been and still is an absolute cesspit of misogyny and sexism. Racism, well, it's a different kind of thing when you talk about racism within the rock music scene. It certainly is there, and might be worth a discussion, but mostly the sexism and misogyny is something that is rampant in like the harder side of rock music, for example. Sexism and misogyny has also been rampant in the tabletop role-playing industry for a long time. Like, basically all through the end of the 90s at least. It's There's a lot of change going on, especially in the gaming industry, and I'm very happy about that. But it certainly has been there for a long time. And it's very difficult to write about these things without, or like, if you're writing about these things nowadays in a fictional context, in a maybe almost humorous context, it is very. The problem is that it's a very difficult thing to not reproduce these toxic patterns and stuff like that, right? The toxic sexism, misogyny that you have in 70s rock music, 60s and 70s music business. It's very difficult to do that. And it's one of the things that Nicholas Eames fails at spectacularly. Now, let me make this clear here. I am not calling him a sexist or anything else. There are situations within this book where it is clear that he is not endorsing any of that behavior. I just feel that when he wrote this book, and let's keep this in mind, this is like a debut novel, he didn't have the skill set or the level of technique that is required to do these issues justice. And that's very much the main problem that I have with this book. I haven't read I think it's Bloody Rose, whatever, the second book in the series, which I've heard addresses a lot of these issues, and I'll probably read it at some point to see how things have changed, because I'm always willing to, give writers the benefit of the doubt, especially with a debut novel, because, you grow better at that shit. Writing is a skill that you can train by just writing more, just like reading, actually. But here, a lot of that stuff gets reproduced, and we're going to go into that in a second. Because, as I said, this is one of my major criticisms here. The next bit is that the world that he's built there, well, world building doesn't need to be all, like, super deep and consistent and whatnot. It doesn't have to. I've played enough games, role-playing games, and DM'd enough of those games as well to know that in the end, the only person really caring about the deep world-building stuff is your game master. Everyone else just is there to kill the monsters or tell their story. And that's fine, and it can be the same for a lot of the books that you write. You don't have to have like 500 pages of world building and information on your world. That doesn't have to be there if you have a cool concept for your world. And Eames does have that. So that's not something that I am criticizing him for. What I find difficult, however, is the humor. Now, humor is a difficult thing to pull off in general, and it really depends on personal taste, personal background, and a lot of other things to vibe with, to make humor work. I personally really enjoy the humor of Terry Pratchett, because it's very much the kind of thing that I also enjoy in my personal life. Even before I first read a Terry Pratchett book, I was fond of really stupid puns and shit. That's my kind of humor. So I vibe with that. Now, Eames in this book does a lot of like rock music references and a bunch of like Dungeons and Dragons references in there. And some of them work, and a lot of them don't, because at the end of the day, a joke is not just managing to, slip in the name of a rock musician or a rock band somewhere, and that's it. Because, haha, he called someone Neil the Young. It's like, yep. That's cool, and I get it. It could have been much better. There could be something more about it. Also, making Neil the Young very old. Yeah, come on. At some points, it feels like Eames as an author is trying too hard to make this funny, to put too many of those things in there, which is sort of like what I tried when I was like, you know, setting out to do more funny role playing game stuff when I like DM'd stuff like that. And I get it, like you found something, the premise is really cool, and then you're gonna play it and milk it until it's over, and then some more. I feel like a lot of the stuff in here could have like benefited from like a more experienced editor going through this and pruning some of those jokes or whatever. Because there's so much potential in here, and that's I guess the other thing why I'm like sort of ranting here is like I wanted this to be really fucking good, and there's so much potential that just gets wasted or buried under like um all the like unfortunate decisions or a lack of some like failure in the execution basically. Anyway, let's get into some details of what I mean here. Let's go into some of the details that I find difficult. First of all, gender. I already said it. Rock music is fucking sexist. Has been for a long time. Like the idea of the whole concept of groupies, of rock stars is basically about the male star and the female groupies that follow him around and signal their adoration by sexual willingness. That's basically it. It's been a cliche forever and ever. And we can go into why that is the case. We can, and there's like, there's people studying that shit, so I'm not going to do that right now. But the point is, it has been a cliche. It has, obviously, its roots in reality. And it is a very toxic thing because it kind of continues, it's self-perpetuating. Newer rock stars kind of expect that shit to be there again, and it's kind of self-perpetuating. The same thing is that you have all these myths about women around rock stars. You have, they're kind of, it's like how we build a mythology, and like especially like the larger context of rock music is very much like a new mythology in general. So the connections is there. It's like you have that archetype of the evil woman that tears apart the band. It's basically the Yoko Ono myth, basically there. Now, is it true? I personally am not a huge Beatles fan, so I will not speak to that to begin with, but the point is, reproducing basically the same thing here, or, later on, it kind of was reproduced once again with, obviously, Nirvana and Kurt Cobain, and Courtney Love, and when you look at it, it's basically once again reproduced here, without any comment. It's just like, of course, the frontman has, the like hippie wife, or not hippie, whatever, like sort of hippie person that is also a terrible drug addict, and that's sort of why the whole thing got torn apart. Now there's a short thing that this is not the only thing that actually made the band break up at the beginning, but all the scenes with Gabriel and Valerie are exactly that. Of course, there's bookers out there that are terrible people, and you have a lot of that stuff in, say, the 80s and 70s and 80s. A lot of like the people around the music industry were semi-criminal for a lot of reasons. There's reasons in like how the music industry was built up, where you can see why there's always been like an interest from organized crime in rock music, or like in music generally. So that all makes sense, but he just reproduces it without questioning it, without subverting any of it. And look, you don't always have to subvert every trope and every cliche, but these are toxic cliches and toxic tropes. Not all of them are, in generally speaking, but this one is the idea of like the drug addict woman that takes apart this male brotherhood and whatnot. And the entire band here is the group called Saga. Actually, it's a really good band if you want to check out Saga. Really cool progressive rock from Canada. Not exactly into drugs that much. Anyway, you have he just like takes that and keeps it going. That's the problem. there's more of those situations there. You have the other one that is like basically this animal, which is Clay Cooper. He's basically this animal, and you know, or monster, and he found the wife that cares for him and makes sure he stays on the straight and narrow, and the human, and discovers the deep thing in there. That's another cliche there. It's like, yeah, it's basically Clay Cooper having mommy issues and needing a wife to look after him and make sure he stays a human person. Because deep inside he is, but he needs that woman to bring that out. Which is another one of those terrible cliches, and he just like takes that and runs with it. It's like bullshit. If you can't get it done by yourself, you have a problem. Find help, find professional help. Just don't go and find a wife that takes care of you. That's not how that works. I could go on with that. Then let's talk about homosexuality. Now, first of all, it's really cool that Nicholas Eames includes a gay character. That's fine. That's great. Especially the way he introduces him, because it's just like, yeah, it's just fact. There's not a big deal made out of it or anything like that, which is cool. And then we come to the problems. First problem there is the wizard Moog, and Moog is funny. And we've seen the idea of the crazy, forgetful sorcerer cliche, which is one of those cliches in tabletop role-playing. We've seen that before. It's been around. It can be fun. I'm not saying anything against it. As I said, I like the stupid old fools in Unseen University and stuff. No worries. But having the gay guy be the butt of almost all the like crazy jokes, and having him like always being the crazy person, is a fucking cliche that maybe doesn't have to be in there. Now obviously you have someone like, say, Richard K. Morgan go with The Steel Remains and the original A Land Fit for Hero trilogy, which you all should go and read because it's fantastic, one of my favorite trilogies in modern fantasy, contemporary fantasy. And he shows that yes, you can have your like very effective, powerful leading hero be gay, and why not? So I don't know, the way it is portrayed as like the one over the top person also being gay, I don't know, just rubbed me a bit the wrong way. Now we come to like another thing that I find problematic there, or difficult, or where I would say that the execution doesn't do the idea and premise justice, which is more what I want to say here. Once again, I don't blame Nicholas Eames for anything of that. I will never call him out for anything, because I feel it feels like there is awareness of all the problems. It just happens to be the problem that he never really manages to do those issues justice. Now, the story with that wizard Moog, obviously, is that he had a husband who died of that terminal, well, at the end of the book, no longer terminal, but anyway, very deadly disease called the rot in there. And that husband is called Freddy. And it's very difficult to do that and not make the connection between the rot and HIV. Because obviously Freddie Mercury, and so forth. Because Freddie was a famous hero himself, obviously, in that world. And thus a rock star, basically. So it's very difficult to not make that connection. But what he does here, by doing that in here, with all the parallels in there, is he once again makes that very, like, problematic or difficult connection between first, homosexuality and HIV. I mean, yeah, that's other people in the book that also have the rot, but it's once again, I don't know. And having a very deadly disease as part of your story works. It doesn't work so well in a basically humorous story. And it's also kind of problematic that it's just cured by smoking weed, basically. And he just happens to find that cure now on the way to somewhere. And yes, there's scenes in there when he realizes how easy it is to cure the rot, and Then he realized that it is just too late to save his, his love of his life. But they just feel like very shallow because it's like just like basically two sentences, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Missed opportunities here. Which I guess is basically the summary of this book is missed opportunities and great premises. So yeah, I just wanted to point that one out because it's another one that kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Now there's also obviously good bits in here. I do like the idea of the band retreating. There's a whole conversation that we need to have. Like, well, we don't need to have it here because, well, not necessarily here. It's more like a music discussion. The idea of us as fans, especially in rock music, making heroes out of like older artists and ignoring anything new. That inert that inertia, that like built-in conservatism in rock music is a huge problem. And I like the way he kind of twists that when they go there and tell them, like, everyone becomes a hero and goes over there because it's about the future and not about the old guys like Saga and Vanguard and whatnot. I do appreciate that, but before that, we once again have a problem because he once again, until then, perpetuates that other idea that you had like a perfect age, a golden age of heroes, a golden age of rock music, which is the 70s and 80s, and now everyone is just like dressing up and just play acting and whatnot. And while this is fine if you talk just about some of the older characters, like in our time it was like all like rock and roll was still dangerous, and now they're just like all these kids sitting in their bedrooms having way too expensive equipment playing gent riffs all the time on YouTube. Well, yeah, that's a nuisance. But on the other hand, like expressions change over time, like art changes over time, so making that new group, like the newer generation, show up and appear as effeminate or like less good than the old stars, basically, is certainly an issue. Now, I can read this with the end as exactly changing that, and that would be cool. But once again, I think it could have been handled more, I don't know, better in a way. Now let's talk about another thing that I find interesting, and where once again I feel that it is not explored, or the potential of the premise is kind of left to die in this first book, and that's the idea of monstrosity. Now the basic setup of the world obviously is pretty cool. You have humans, and you have the Wyld, and there's all these monsters. But some of those monsters are sentient, and some of those monsters can actually live in cities as second-class people, and in slavery. And so the idea of all of that stuff is, first of all, is a huge potential, because you can read it as a treatment of how we, as humans, in our world, deal with, say, such things as race or ethnicity, how we treat with these problems, and how we are pretty fucked up nowadays already. You could also look at it and how we treat the treatment of animals, because you have that whole idea that you have the bands show up in these arenas and kill monsters. And some of those monsters are just basically animals bred to be killed there, and some of them are at least semi-sentient or fully sentient, like that kobold. And it's so frustrating because it's all right there when they are in his five courts and then talking to the fucking kobolds, and the wife was taken away into the arena. So it's all fucking there, and he then just leaves it. Once again, I've been told that that stuff is better in the next book, so I don't know. But in this one, he leaves it. It's so frustrating. This is just this huge pile of missed opportunities, all these really cool premises, all these deep ideas of like how the games we play, the way we think about fame, all that stuff is highly twisted in a lot of ways and fucked up, and it never really explores it to the fullest. That's, I guess, what made me so frustrated over time. Um, yeah, so that one really pissed me off in a lot of ways. Now, let's look a bit at characters and then kind of wrap this up. Like, most of the characters are actually really, really flat and two-dimensional. They're basically cutouts. The only way you can see there's some, details in there that kind of work is sort of some of the interactions between some of the characters of the band itself. Clay Cooper, well, not really. He's basically your typical, like, first male D&D character, is right. You build this character with this tragic past, and he's trying to be a good man, but he's maybe also a monster, and he's probably wearing a trench coat and all of that stuff. So there's that. Gabriel kind of works as the front man. Like, what I really appreciate about it is the idea of, like, who's actually the leader of the band compared to the front man. That you have that one person that everyone trusts. And I've been in bands. I've been in, like, terrible punk bands as a kid, but I've also been on tour with bands. I've had a lot of tour with bands, and that's an observation that is absolutely true. It obviously also true for general groups of friendships. There's always that one person. He's probably not the loudest person in the group, not the one with all the crazy ideas, but he or they. Let's say they, because obviously I'm also working on the language stuff and I suck at it. Anyway, so that person in your group of friends, in whether it's in a band or in just a group of friends, you always have that one person that basically everyone that's sort of responsible for, like, the overall atmosphere in the group. That is, well, not responsible, but they're usually not aware of it. Well, the one person that, like, everyone trusts, and while you have someone else who comes up with all the shitty ideas and all the craziness that you do in a group of friends, you're usually just in when that main person says yes. And that dynamic I felt was really interesting, especially with the whole thing that Clay Cooper is never really aware of it. I like that. That was really done well, because it shows that Eames is very much capable of observing, like, human dynamics, group dynamics, and that's good. So I have hope there. I don't want to, trash this book to all hell here, because that's not what I want to do. Because once again, there's a lot of potential there. I just wish it would have been explored more, or I don't know. Anyway, so that's certainly a thing. A lot of the other stuff is, once again, I don't know. The bad guys are just so cliche bad guys. I don't know, the Booker being all greedy and something of a mobster. And it's once again a cliche from, like, 80s, 70s and 80s, mostly rock music, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. It doesn't work that well. The Gorgon, I don't know. The Gorgon could be a really interesting explanation on why, racial discrimination and racism forces people into crime, because you're obviously into crime because of partly of that. But instead it becomes kind of that scene that is all about really stupid dick jokes, with the king being, that guy with a cushion between his legs. It's just like awkward, stupid dick jokes instead of actually exploring that issue. I mean, we haven't spoken about, like, Matty Skulldrummer, or whatever his name is, and the whole idea that you have a chapter called The Cuckold King that's all about how he doesn't, or he kind of knows, but that his wife is, like, that all his kids are actually not his kids, and I don't know. I just feel that there's a lot of, like, too much reliance on cliches as jokes instead of subverting those cliches. Another thing that I really didn't like was the portrayal of I mean, that's a huge one. All right, let's go that one, and then we'll kind of like drop it after that. The huge one is the cannibals in the forest. Right, you have a forest with all these monsters in there, and they crash there. And the first person they meet is that troll. That troll is super nice and clever, and actually kind of shows them the cure for the rot and everything. And then they meet those cannibals, and they're all stupid and primitive, and also eat people. Yeah, there's no comment on their skin color there. But all the rest is so fucking close to all the terrible racist tropes and cliches. Like, that doesn't have to happen in 2017. We're beyond that. We don't have to do that anymore. It just, kind of makes me angry because, once again, I feel it's more like, just like not questioning it and just going for the cheap shot there. And then at the same time, you have the Ettins there, which are really cool. The idea of that one Etin trying to, explain to the blind Etin, that's a whole conversation there that we probably should not have. It's still a really interesting and cool way to explore that monster. And some of the monster explorations there are really cool. Oh, also, the owlbear joke is just really good. I like the owlbear joke. That's really cool. But yeah. The way the cannibals are portrayed as these vile natives in the forest with ridiculous, like, stunted speech and all of that. I don't know. It is unfortunate, at least, because once again, I don't want to call it racist. I think it is just like a lack of trying, or a lack of, probably a lack of confidence in actually pulling it off, mostly. So that's my issue with those. That made me really angry. That whole part could have been cut, I think, and it would have made a better story, because it's not necessary. Just for a couple of cheap cannibal jokes, come on, cut that whole chapter, like those 2 chapters out, and it would have been a better book, basically. They could have still met those Ettins somewhere else, I guess. Anyway, also the character of Larkspur or Savatha, the Deva. I don't know. It's, in general, a really cool idea that she's, this multi-layered character, but it doesn't work. She has a terrible past, she becomes a monster, and she gets saved by the hard-ass warrior being good in bed. I don't know. Does she need a man to fall in love with to become at least semi-redeemable? Aren't we beyond that? I don't know. So, I don't know. I realize I've been saying I don't know a lot, because that's sort of how I feel about this book. It has all this amazing potential, these really cool ideas, a unique setting, a not so bad premise with the rock star adventurer thing, and then it squanders all that potential. And I just feel that, like, if Nicholas Eames would have been, like, less ambitious with the first work and built up to this, like, I would like to see how I read that book, like, after he's written, like, I don't know, 5 other novels and honed his craft as an author and had, like, a really good editor, because then it could have been, like, an absolute masterpiece. Unfortunately, it's more like something of a mess, basically. I'm not sorry I've read it. I've read much worse. Much worse. Because this one is redeemable. I've read very unredeemable books in my time. So, no, this is not that. I just wish it would have been all the things it could have been. But yeah, this is sort of the end. So if you've read Kings of the Wyld, I assume a lot of you have, let me know what you think in the comments. Like, subscribe, do that kind of stuff. Also, please tell me, is the second book better? Should I go and read the second book or not? Because right now, I'm undecided about it. Obviously, I just got the Latro Soldier in the Mist trilogy by Gene Wolfe, so I'm definitely going to read that one, because I've been waiting for that one to be available on audio for ages. But should I read Bloody Rose or not? Let me know in the comments. And yeah, thanks for bearing with me being angry. or not angry, but frustrated. And I'll talk to you about, I don't know, something tomorrow, I guess, if I get away with all the other stuff that's going on. Until then, cheers.